Taiwan is nothing new to this channel, as I discussed some cities during a little island series I did roughly a year ago. But there's a little known smaller island falling within the jurisdiction of the Republic of China that often gets overlooked, so I felt it worthwhile to come back and take a look. Today we're going to hone in on something known as Green Island. Hello and welcome to another episode focusing on one specific topic. If you're new to Nick Geo, welcome. My name is Nick, if that wasn't obvious, and I cover geographical topics ranging anywhere from breaking down entire US states to historical or cultural significance inside a country, worldwide topics in list format, and travel. To get this one started, as usual, we'll go ahead and locate the land that we're discussing. So Green Island, pronounced Lutao in Chinese, is a tiny piece of volcanic land found in the Pacific Ocean roughly 33 kilometers off the coast of Taiwan. Despite being such a small land area, it's surprisingly full of wonders, both beautiful and grim. Thanks to its volcanic activity that gave it formation, it's full of rugged sea cliffs as well as many caves, both being part of its draw for tourism. The township was really quick to catch on to this, probably realizing how much cash it brings into its otherwise small economy, and thus created a lot of infrastructure to accommodate this, especially in the village of Nanliao, complete with a tiny airport, and the smaller and quieter village of Kongguan. Green Island's population is only around 3,000, and that's actually as of 2008, and it's got a road circling around the entire thing running only about 18 kilometers total, making it easy to traverse around the entire coastal circumference. And really, that's all you'll need anyway, as there's little to see making your way inland to the volcanic peak, save for Goshun Historic Trail, which is an ancient path originally meant as a shortcut for the island's ancestors. You'll find this near the highest point of the island, Mount Huashao, at 281 meters high. However, if there's an activity that Green Island is really known for, it has to be snorkeling. It's surrounded by lots of coral reefs with plenty of unique fish to get a look at in the clearer waters, accompanied by several diving and snorkeling centers such as the Venus Dive Center or the Chico Snorkeling Area. Similarly, the Jiaori hot springs are unique in the way that they are the very rare saltwater spring found otherwise only in Japan and Italy. As I mentioned, caves aren't exactly a rare feature here. However, if one stands out, it may be the Kuan Yin Cave, named after a Buddhist deity that its stalagmites are said to resemble. It's sometimes referred to as the Goddess of Mercy, said to look over the fishermen. The sacred cave is probably the most important religious site on the island, with people still coming to pay respects and burn incense today. Inside the cave runs an underground river, as the cave reflects erosion of over tens of thousands of years, and it's easy to find thanks to the Chinese arch by its entrance. Speaking of religious significance, Yuxiu still sees old stone houses from the first civilization on Green Island, and the Confucius Rock and Sleeping Beauty Rock sit near each other on the west side of the island. But now, let's look at a couple of the man-made structures. For one, the Little Great Wall, or Xiaochengcheng, is something of a tiny replica of the real deal found across the strait in the People's Republic of China, working as a nice trail that runs from the main road out to a lookout point in the mighty Pacific Ocean. It also gives a nice look at the rocks I just mentioned, as well as the Dog Rock that sits separate from the rest of the island. Further, the Lutao Lighthouse is a super tall structure reaching 33 meters in height and actually has some US history to it. In 1938, the US funded its construction shortly after the sinking of the SS President Hoover, meant as a thank you to the locals that went on a rescue mission to save the people that were aboard. This is found at the tip of the island near the wreckage point. Interestingly, it was actually designed by a Japanese architect, since all of Taiwan was under the control of the Japanese Empire at the time, and it would finish just in time to go to war with the US. What fantastic timing. So, it would inevitably end up destroyed by US bombings and wouldn't see reconstruction until the late 1940s by the Kuomintang, or KMT. Oh yeah, speaking of them. I guess we'll talk about that grim side that I mentioned at the top, a big elephant in the room. You see, Green Island is a pretty remote and isolated setting, being a fitting place for a high-security prison, not unlike others we've seen before. So when the KMT lost the Chinese Civil War against the People's Liberation Army and were exiled to Taiwan, this became the perfect spot to send political prisoners during what was known as the White Terror. Now, what was the White Terror? Well, this new regime in Taiwan, headed by Kai-shek, wasn't too fond of communist rebels or even just people suspected of being such, and felt they needed to be dealt with. So, this misleadingly titled Oasis Villa and New Life Correction Center were opened, located right on the northern tip of Green Island. Martial law was enacted in 1949, and many were arrested, killed, or otherwise disappeared for several decades until the law allowing for this was repealed. Moreover, prior to Chinese settlement, Taiwan also had a lot of indigenous tribal life that also felt the boot of this movement, but being displaced heavily here, and some were then accused of being Japanese sympathizers by the island governor Chen Yi. Further escalations were rooted in the so-called 228 incident in 1947, an uprising that was brutally put down by the new regime, named since it happened on February 28th. Throughout the White Terror, it was forbidden to speak of this incident. As the years went on, nationalist campaigns such as enforcing Mandarin as the spoken language, even amongst indigenous folks, popped up, and for decades the military would speak of launching a campaign to retake all of mainland China. Many countries did recognize Taipei as the legit government of China until things started to change in the early 1970s. Into the 1980s, activists and their families have had their homes broken into by police, and this even made its way overseas. For example, journalist Henry Liu was gunned down in California due to projecting Chiang Ching-kuo, which was Chiang Kai-shek's son, then the leader, in poor light, getting caught by other students that were in the US on KMT scholarships. Tying this back to Green Island, this is something that is now widely discussed not only on Green Island but in all of Taiwan. Those prisons now sit as museums in the Greater White Terror Memorial Park. Regular tours go through here for a closer look at the stories around what is probably the island's most famous site, and admission is actually free. You can see former courtrooms, barracks, workshops, cell tracks, and the likes. Further, the Human Rights Memorial Monument can be found looking at like a large, brutalist structure that commemorates many of the famous dissidents that may mean more to those on the island than outside tourists. Different art exhibits and symbolic works exist within, showing a more realistic reflection. Now, as a little disclaimer, there are folks who see Chiang Kai-shek and his regime in a more positive note due to other strides unrelated to the White Terror, as is the case with many controversial figures, and I always stress that this channel is neutral on such topics, other than, obvious ones. But even the current regime won't simply overlook the impact of the White Terror and the importance of its place in Taiwan's history. Thank you for taking the time to look at this small island with a beautiful landscape and equally dark and overlooked past. What do you think about Green Island? What do you think about its sites or history? And further, what do you think about the KMT? I'd love for you to let me know in the comments, and if there's another smaller niche geography related subject you'd like me to cover, do tell. Until next time.